China is attacking American jobs. Iran is attacking American troops. And Congress only attacks the president.
A dozen different cities. Meantime, here in the U.S., officials say there is now a confirmed second case. This one found in Chicago. The first case is in Washington State. Meantime, both Australia and France have also reported cases tonight.
On behalf of myself, Senator Murkowski, and Senator Romney,
this is a question for the counsel for the president. If President Trump had more than one motive for his alleged conduct, such as the pursuit of personal political advantage, rooting out corruption, and the promotion of national interests, how should the Senate consider more than one motive in its assessment of Article 1?
The president wasn't concerned about burden sharing? Read all of the records. And then there was Mr. Schiff saying yesterday, maybe we can learn a lot more from our Ukrainian ally. Let me read you what our Ukrainian ally said. President Zelensky, when asked about these allegations of quid pro quo, he said, I think you read everything. I think you read the text. He says, we had a good phone call. These are his words. It was normal. We spoke about many things. I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. They think you can read minds. I think you look at the words. I'm going to yield the balance of my time to my colleague, the Deputy White House Counsel, Pat Philbin. He's going to address two issues. So we're going to try to do this in a very systematic way over the days ahead. One involving issues related to, because this came up near the end of there, so I want to do this in a sequence, obstruction as it relates to some of the subpoenas that were issued. He's also going to touch on some of the due process issues, since it was at the end of theirs and fresh in everybody's mind. Mr. Chief Justice.
Mr. Chief Justice, Senators, Majority Leader McConnell, Democratic Leader Schumer, good morning. As Mr. Sekulow said, I'm going to touch on a couple of issues related to obstruction and due process. Just to hit on some points before we go into more detail in the rest of our presentation. I'd like to start with one of the points that Manager Jeffries focused a lot on towards the end of the presentation yesterday, related to the obstruction charge in the second article of impeachment, because he tried to portray a picture of what he called blanket defiance, that there was a response from the Trump administration that was simply, we won't cooperate with anything, we won't give you any documents, we won't do anything, and it was blanket defiance really without explanation, that was all there was just an assertion that we wouldn't cooperate. And he said, and I pulled this from the transcript, that President Trump's objections are not generally rooted in the law and are not legal arguments. And that's simply not true. That's simply not true. In every instance, when there was resistance to a subpoena for a witness or for documents, there was a legal explanation of the justification for it. For example, they focused a lot on an October 8th letter from the counsel to the president, Pat Cipollone, but they didn't show you an October 18th letter, which is up on the screen now, that went through in detail why subpoenas that had been issued by Manager Schiff's committees were invalid, because the House has not authorized your committees to conduct any such inquiry or to subpoena information in furtherance of it. And that was because the House had not taken a vote to authorize the committee to exercise the power of impeachment to issue any compulsory process. And I'm going to get into that issue in just a moment. Not only was there a legal explanation, a specific reason for every resistance, not just blanket defiance, every step that the administration took was supported by an opinion from the Department of Justice, from the Office of Legal Counsel. And those are explained in our brief. And the major opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel is actually attached in our trial memorandum as an appendix. Now, Mr. Jeffries and other managers also suggested that the Trump administration took the approach of no negotiation, blanket refusal, and no attempt to accommodate. That's also not true. In the October 8th letter that Mr. Cipollone sent to Speaker Pelosi, it said explicitly, quote, "If the committees wish to return to the regular order of oversight requests, we stand ready to engage in that process as we have in the past, in a manner consistent with well-established bipartisan constitutional protections and a respect for the separation of powers enshrined in the Constitution." End quote. It was Manager Schiff and his committees that did not want to engage in any accommodation process. We had said that we were willing to explore that. The House managers have also asserted a number of times, this came up on that first long night when we were here until 2 as well, that the Trump administration never asserted executive privilege. Never asserted executive privilege. And I explained at the time, that's technically true, but misleading. Misleading because the rationale on which the subpoenas were resisted never depended on an assertion of executive privilege. Each of the rationales that we have offered, and I'll go into the one of them today, that the House subpoenas were not authorized, does not depend on making that formal assertion of executive privilege. It's a different institution gets derailed and has to deal with it. And that should not be the way, that should not be the precedent that is set here for the way this body will have to handle all impeachments in the future. Because if it becomes that easy for the House to do it, they'll be doing it a lot. Thank you.
On Monday, President Trump tweeted, "The Democrat-controlled House never even asked John Bolton to testify." End quote. So that the record is accurate, did House impeachment investigators ask Mr. Bolton to testify?
Additional dollars, and contrary to the president's tweet that all of the aid arrived and that it arrived ahead of schedule, that is not true. All of the aid has not arrived. And let's talk about what kind of signal withholding the aid for no legitimate reason. The president talked about burden sharing, but nothing had changed on the ground. Holding the aid for no legitimate reason sent a strong message that we would not want to send to Russia, that the relationship between the United States and Ukraine was on shaky ground. It actually undercut Ukraine's ability to negotiate with Russia, with whom, as everybody in this room knows, is in an active war.
Pro quo. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. If you do it, you get the money. There's no one in this chamber that would regard that as in any way unlawful. The only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo were in some way illegal. Now, we talked about motive. There are 3 possible motives that a political figure can have. One, a motive in the public interest, and the Israel argument would be in the public interest. The second is in his own political interest, and the third, which hasn't been mentioned, would be in his own financial interest, his own pure financial interest, just putting money in the bank. I want to focus on the second one for just one moment. Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment. I quoted President Lincoln. When President Lincoln told General Sherman to let the troops go to Indiana so that they can vote for the Republican Party. Let's assume the president was running at that point. And it was in his electoral interest to have these soldiers put at risk the lives of many, many other soldiers who would be left without their company. Would that be an unlawful quid pro quo? No, because the president, A, believed it was in the national interest, but B, he believed that his own election was essential to victory in the Civil War. Every president believes that. That's why it's so dangerous.
Trump's world. Up is down, lies are the truth, allies are enemies. Everything is through the looking glass. The main point. Meanwhile, Iowa frontrunner Bernie Sanders remained in Washington for the impeachment trial. Amid increasing party concern about Sanders' momentum, a Democrat.
When you watch the Super Bowl on Sunday, in between all the ads will be a public service announcement featuring a former NFL star with a serious message. CBS News special correspondent James Brown on how this former player is creating change.
I'll never forget that night. My wife walks up after the game and told me that my cousin Corey had been killed.
Former NFL player Anquan Boldin's cousin, Corey Jones, was shot by a police officer in 2015. The officer was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison, but the case opened Boldin's eyes.
You're happy that justice was served, but then I soon found out that he was actually the first officer that was convicted in the state of Florida on an on-duty shooting in the last 30 years. I retired to fight for social justice.
Trump seemed confident at this rally in Iowa as he heads into a crucial moment in his impeachment trial. Then hours later, he got another boost. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander was perhaps Democrats' last best hope to get enough votes for witnesses. But late last night, he declared his intention to vote no in this blistering statement that called the entire process shallow, hurried, and wholly partisan. Republicans Mitt Romney and Susan Collins have declared they are yeses, but Democrats need 4 Republicans to subpoena witnesses.
Justice, this is a trial. As a trial, as any 10-year-old knows, we should have witnesses. That's why all these distractions. That's why the president's people are telling you to avoid witnesses, because they are afraid of the witnesses.
The truth is staring us in the eyes. We know why they don't want John Bolton to testify. It's not because we...
Political earthquake, the president's expected acquittal, won by the thinnest of definitions, say defiant Democrats, still reeling from the Senate's 51-49.
Get elected. That's a very common belief among the grassroots of our party. But I will say this president has stood for life. He stood for rule of law judges. He stood for tax cuts. He stood for deregulation, energy independence. These are Republican ideals. And he has made the RNC significantly stronger by supporting our party. And we will be stronger after him because of the investment he's put in data and digital and the things to make us strong beyond his presidency.
Okay, I understand. You don't want to comment on your comfort.
Biggest infrastructure in the history of politics. I'm not concerned about what Bloomberg's putting out, and his ads, I see them all the time. I think they're terrible. Mike gets it done. What does he get done? I don't know. I don't know anything about him. We're not seeing him talking to the voters at the level that I think you need to be competitive. Yeah. And the president's not afraid of anybody. Let's be honest. He punches at everybody.
Fair. But Mike Bloomberg has tremendous spending ability here. He's not putting limits, really, on what he's willing to do to defeat President Trump. He's worth $60 billion, and he's going to hand this off, even if it's not him.
Well, President Trump went up against Hillary Clinton, who had significantly more money than he did. We have seen candidate after candidate with these huge war chests come in and think they can buy an election, and the American people don't like that. And President Trump, if you look at the crowds that we're seeing, which are bigger than ever, 150,000 people signed up to come to a rally in New Jersey, in blue New Jersey. If you look at the fundraising, if you look at the
modeling a lot of what he's doing around what Trump did. It's a lot of digital. Yeah. It's a lot of TV.
He's modeling it, but he's not Trump. That's the big factor. Bloomberg is not Trump. He's not going to get a crowd like that. I'd like to see him do a rally and try and even get 100 people to come. I mean, this is not the movement candidate. Bloomberg, and I think he's got a real issue with the Democrat Party. I mean, listen, they just changed their debate rules and their structure for a billionaire.